It was a day like any other when billionaire Thomas Rowland stepped into his luxurious mansion after a long day of meetings. But this was no ordinary day. What he found when he walked through the door would change everything and set a series of events into motion that no one could have predicted. You see, Thomas Rowland was a man of power. He had built an empire from the ground up, and his wealth knew no bounds. But despite all of his success, there was one thing that haunted him: his son Ben. At just 10 years old, Ben had been diagnosed with a rare illness that left him constantly in and out of the hospital. No amount of wealth or influence could seem to fix what was broken inside him. The best doctors, the most advanced treatments, they tried it all. But nothing worked. It was in the midst of this uncertainty that Thomas found himself desperate. That was when he turned to Clara. Clara, the humble nurse who had been recommended by a close friend. Clara wasn't like the rest. She wasn't there for the money, the fame, or any of the other superficial things that the world offered. No, Clara was there because she genuinely cared. She believed in healing, not just the body, but the heart and soul too. From the moment she walked into the Rowland mansion, things changed. She was calm, unassuming, yet her presence had a quiet strength. The way she cared for Ben, with tenderness and patience, was something Thomas hadn't seen before. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a beacon of hope in a house that had grown dark with worry. For weeks, Clara attended to Ben, and in that time, Thomas noticed something profound. As his son's condition slowly began to improve under her care, Thomas found himself starting to look at Clara in a different light. Her dedication, her kindness, and her warmth, it was as if she had somehow brought light back into his life. But despite all of this, Thomas never once acknowledged the deeper connection he was starting to feel for her. But Clara wasn't there for any of that. She wasn't looking for praise, recognition, or anything from Thomas except for his trust. She was focused on one thing: helping Ben. But sometimes life has a funny way of twisting things, and what started as a professional relationship was slowly, imperceptibly, turning into something more. Thomas was starting to depend on Clara not just for his son's care, but for something deeper that he hadn't even fully realized. As the days went by, everything seemed to be falling into place. Ben's health improved, and the Rowland household began to feel more like a home again. But then came the day when Thomas walked in early, when everything was about to shift. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Thomas had wrapped up his meetings earlier than expected. The day had been exhausting, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Ben. He hadn't seen his son in hours, and he was eager to check in on him. As he approached the living room, he noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, and there was soft laughter coming from inside. At first, he smiled. Ben was finally showing signs of joy again. But then his smile faltered. As Thomas pushed the door open, he saw something he wasn't prepared for. Ben was sitting on the couch, looking more alive than ever. But what took him by surprise was Clara. She wasn't just sitting next to Ben, she was laughing with him, talking with him as if she were part of the family. The connection between them was undeniable. And in that moment, something in Thomas stirred. For the first time in a long time, he realized that what he had been seeing wasn't just a nurse looking after his son. There was something far deeper happening, something that made him question everything. But just as quickly as the thought came to him, he shook it off. He couldn't let his mind wander down that road. Clara was there for Ben, only for Ben. And that's what mattered. But that was the moment when everything started to unravel. It wasn't just about Ben anymore. Thomas found himself caught in a web of emotions he didn't understand, torn between his feelings for Clara and his responsibilities to his son. And as if that wasn't enough, Clara's sudden decision to leave the Rowland household a week later sent shockwaves through everything. Why did Clara leave? Why would she walk away when things were finally looking up? Was it because of Thomas? Was it something Ben needed her to do? The questions hung in the air like a cloud of uncertainty. And so the stage was set. What would happen next? Would Thomas confront his feelings and fight for Clara? Would Clara ever return to finish the job she had so lovingly started? Or was this the end of their story, with a shadow of unspoken words and emotions hanging over them? You're going to want to stick around because the answers you're waiting for are closer than you think. The next chapter of this story will leave you speechless. Days passed after Clara's sudden departure, and Thomas Rowland couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The house, once filled with the sounds of Ben's laughter and Clara's gentle voice, felt eerily quiet. The bright light that had slowly returned to the Rowland home seemed to dim once more. Ben's recovery had stalled in Clara's absence, and Thomas couldn't help but wonder if it was a coincidence or if it was somehow tied to the woman who had been by his side all this time. He tried to go back to his routine, throwing himself into work, but it wasn't the same. His mind kept drifting back to Clara, her calm presence, the way she understood Ben like no one else. It wasn't just her skill as a nurse, although her expertise was impressive. It was the way she connected with people, the way she cared without expecting anything in return. He knew he'd never met anyone like her before, and that realization gnawed at him. But Clara had left without a word, and it hurt Thomas more than he was willing to admit. Was she angry? Was she scared? Or had she simply realized that her place was never supposed to be here? Ben, too, had become withdrawn. The spark he had shown before Clara's departure was now gone, replaced by a quiet sadness. He missed her. Even though he was just a boy, the bond they had formed was clear. It wasn't just about the treatment. It was about the kindness and the care she had shown him when no one else could get through. And though Thomas tried his best to fill the gap, he knew that he couldn't replace Clara. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a lifeline to his son. Desperate to find out what had happened, Thomas began reaching out to mutual acquaintances who might know where Clara had gone. But all he got were vague answers. She had disappeared from her usual places of work. No one seemed to know where she had gone, and that only added to the frustration building inside him. He knew Clara was trying to protect something. Protect herself, or maybe Ben. But what? Why hadn't she even said goodbye? Why had she left so abruptly when things were finally looking better? One evening, after yet another day of searching and coming up empty-handed, Thomas sat in his office, staring at the phone in his hand. He could feel the pressure mounting, the uncertainty of it all eating at him. He needed answers. And so he did something he hadn't planned on. He dialed her number. It rang once, then twice, then 3 times. He was about to hang up, convinced that it was pointless, when suddenly she answered. "Hello." Thomas froze, hearing Clara's voice for the first time in days. It was shaky, almost as if she hadn't expected the call. He wasn't sure where to begin, but the words spilled out before he could stop them. "Clara, it's Thomas. Where are you? Why did you leave? Ben misses you. We both miss you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Thomas held his breath, waiting for her response. "I'm sorry." Clara's voice was soft, barely audible. "I didn't mean to cause any pain. I had to go. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing anymore. Everything was becoming so complicated." "Complicated?" Thomas's chest tightened. "Complicated how? You were helping Ben, Clara. You were making a difference. I don't understand. If you care about him, about us, why did you leave without telling me anything?" Another pause, and Thomas could hear the tension in the silence. "I do care about you both. But sometimes helping someone means knowing when to step away. I've been in situations like this before, where I get too close, where I become too involved. And it hurts when it ends. I don't want that. Not again. Thomas's heart sank. He wasn't sure if she was talking about Ben or about him. Was she pulling away because of him? Was she afraid of what might happen if they grew closer? He was about to say something when Clara interrupted him. I care about Ben deeply, but I can't stay. It's for the best. Please understand. The line went dead. Thomas sat there, stunned. What was he supposed to understand? That she cared too much and needed to leave to protect herself. It didn't make sense. The more he thought about it, the more questions piled up in his mind. What was it that had caused her to leave without warning? Was it something he had done? Or was there more to Clara's past that she wasn't telling him, determined to find answers? Thomas knew he had to find Clara. He wasn't going to let her slip away this time, not without a fight. There were too many things left unsaid, and too much at stake. The next day, Thomas set off to find Clara. He didn't care how far he had to go or what he had to do. He had to know the truth. As he drove through the city, he couldn't help but think about everything that had brought him to this moment. His relationship with Ben, his struggle to protect his son, his own growing feelings for Clara. All of it was tangled together in a way that had become impossible to ignore. Thomas knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Clara walk out of their lives without understanding why. There was more to this story, and he was going to uncover it, no matter what it took. But as he turned down a quiet street, Thomas saw something that made his heart stop Clara's car. It was parked outside a modest apartment building. His pulse quickened. Was she really here? Had she been hiding in plain sight this whole time? Without thinking, he parked the car and rushed towards the building. The door was locked, but there was a buzzer. He pressed it, his fingers trembling as he waited. After what felt like an eternity, the door clicked open, and Thomas stepped inside. He had no idea what he was about to find, but one thing was certain. This was the moment that everything was about to change. As Thomas stepped inside the apartment building, his heart pounded in his chest. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed to echo through the narrow hallway, adding to the sense of urgency that gripped him. He didn't know what he was expecting, but there was a strange feeling creeping up his spine, one that told him the answers he was seeking might not be the ones he wanted to hear. He found her apartment on the second floor, a modest door with no fancy nameplate, just a number. His fingers hovered over the doorbell. Should he knock? Should he even be here? But the thought of Ben, of everything that had happened, pushed him forward. He needed to know why Clara had left, why she pulled away from them so suddenly. Before he could press the button, the door creaked open slightly. There she was. Clara, looking exactly as she did the day she left, soft, yet strong, calm, but with an undeniable tension in her eyes. The surprise on her face quickly shifted to a mix of guilt and resignation. "I didn't think you'd come," she said quietly, her voice almost as fragile as her expression. "I had to," Thomas replied, his words feeling heavier than he expected. "Clara, why? Why did you leave like that? We needed you. I needed you." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped back and motioned for him to come inside. As he walked through the door, Thomas was struck by how different this place was from his mansion. It was simple, almost bare. There were no signs of luxury, no overwhelming decorations. It was just Clara. A small table in the corner, some books stacked neatly, a single plant by the window. "I'm sorry," Clara finally spoke, her voice breaking the silence. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep things professional, just focus on Ben." But she trailed off, her eyes avoiding his gaze. but I wasn't prepared for the way I started feeling. I wasn't prepared for you." Thomas felt a pang in his chest at her words, but his confusion only deepened. "What do you mean?" "You left to protect yourself." Clara nodded slowly. "I've been in relationships before where I got too close, where my feelings got tangled up in the job, and when it ended, it hurt more than it was worth. I didn't want that for you. I didn't want to hurt you, Thomas, or Ben." Thomas swallowed hard, trying to process what she was saying. "Clara, what are you talking about? You didn't hurt anyone. You helped. You saved Ben. You saved us." Clara shook her head, looking almost defeated. "I knew what I was walking into when I agreed to take care of Ben. But I didn't realize how much I'd start caring. Not just for him. For you too. I know it's wrong, but I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I didn't want to be a complication. I didn't want to get tangled in feelings that had no place." Thomas felt a surge of emotion. All this time, he'd assumed she left out of some obligation or to distance herself from a professional relationship. But now it was clear Clara had been fighting her own feelings, her own heart. She cared for him, just as he had started to care for her. "I'm not asking for anything more, Thomas. I can't be with you in that way. Not like this. It's not fair to Ben. And it's not fair to either of us," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But Thomas couldn't stop himself any longer. The feelings he had suppressed for weeks finally came to the surface. "Clara, I don't care about what's fair. I care about you. About Ben. We're a family now, whether you want to admit it or not." For a moment, Clara stood there in stunned silence. And then something in her eyes shifted. She closed the gap between them, her hand reaching up to gently touch his arm. It was as if a weight had been lifted, as if all the walls she had built around herself came crashing down in that instant. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what this means. Scared of what will happen if we get too close." Thomas looked into her eyes, feeling the same fear, but also a sense of certainty he hadn't felt before. "I'm scared too, but I know we can face this together." In that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. The confusion, the distance, the unanswered questions, all of it had led to this one moment of clarity. Clara had walked away to protect herself, but Thomas had fought to bring her back, not just for Ben's sake, but for his own. And in that quiet apartment, the foundation for something new began to take shape. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. Clara returned to the Rowland mansion, this time not as a nurse, but as part of the family. Ben's health continued to improve, but more importantly, his spirit had been restored. The laughter that had been absent for so long returned to the house, and with it, a sense of hope that had been lost for months. Thomas and Clara's relationship grew stronger, but this time it was built on mutual understanding and trust. They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, complications, and fears to overcome. But together, they were ready to face whatever came next. As for Ben, he thrived under Clara's care, not just because of her medical expertise, but because of the love and dedication she poured into him every single day. And as the months went by, it became clear that the real healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Thomas, Clara, and Ben had come together against the odds. And while their story was far from over, they had learned one important thing. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from letting others in, even when it's the hardest thing to do. The story of their lives had only just begun, but it was one they were ready to live together.